Conqueror Mk is a British heavy tank at battle rating 7.7. It is exactly how people imagine heavy tanks: big, lots of armor, slow, and a huge cannon. While playing this tank, I was mainly using armor-piercing discarding saber rounds. I know what you think.
It's this type of round that deals almost no damage.
Well, yes, but their lack of damage comes from the size of the projectile. The less projectile's mass, the less damage. The Conqueror has 120mm cannon. That's quite a big caliber. Even when using APDS rounds that are designed to have decreased mass in order to achieve higher velocity and therefore more penetration, it is still over 7 kilograms of steel. Purely because the cannon is so big, its subcaliber projectiles remain relatively big as well. So while the damage is not too impressive, it is better than I expected, especially since over 360mm of penetration of APDS round allows you to aim at the center of mass of the enemy tank for maximum damage, in many cases one shot. Only when facing some heavier Soviet tanks or German tank destroyers you will have to worry about their weak spots. Also, APDS rounds are known to be very fast, around 1.5 kilometers per second. So it's relatively easy for you to hit fast-moving tanks that are very far away, especially since the tank has a rangefinder that allows you to measure distances of more than 2 kilometers. Though hitting distant targets is so easy that I found rangefinder totally unnecessary unless shooting across the whole map from one respawn to another. By the way, since the Conqueror has a stabilized gun, you can shoot accurately while moving. Meanwhile, opponents without stabilizer will have to either keep moving under fire, unable to shoot back, or stop and become an even easier target. The tank can also use HESH rounds, but I see no reason to use them. Their damage is just as random as APDS, their muzzle velocity is much slower, and every fence or tree on its way will detonate it too early, while APDS can be shot through multiple walls or even some buildings with no problems. While technically it could be more beneficial to use HESH against light tanks, the cannon's reload is just too long to often switch between ammunition types. With a screw, it's almost 15 seconds. Around twice longer than average reload of medium tanks at Conqueror's battle rating. If your shot hasn't done enough damage to disable the opponent, it can become complicated to survive the reload, especially at close range fights where fast opponents have enough time to simply approach you while your tank is vulnerable, and dealing with multiple fast opponents is even more complicated. So just like with all tanks that have slow reload, it's important to stay near allies who will at least force enemies to stay in cover and not be able to simply surround you. Tank's armor is exactly where you need it the most, in front. Hull has sloped 76 and 130mm armor plates. Since tank's hull, especially the bottom plate, is one of the easiest tank spots to hide, it's okay to not have that much protection here, because most of the time only your turret will be sticking out of the cover and it will take most of enemy hits. So very conveniently, the thickest armor frontally is on the turret. Newer tanks in War Thunder would use volumetric armor, but Conqueror was made using the old system, which is basically a mess of little pieces. Nevertheless, these pieces do their job very well. Their thickness can range from 89 to over 300mm, most of them are sloped, many overlap. Generally speaking, opponents are going to have a hard time penetrating the turret without proper aim. Furthermore, the tank has modification that adds additional armor in front of the vehicle. The hull gets covered with a 20mm plate, and then additional 14mm plates covers this plate and sides of a turret. By the way, putting stickers on additional armor plates will also duplicate it on tank itself, so you get twice as many stickers. If this is not OP, I don't know what is. Sides though are only 50mm thick, so the Conqueror is quite vulnerable to flanking, especially considering that it has slower than average turret's rotation. But again, staying with teammates will ensure that you won't be flanked so easily. Gun depression is -7 degrees, few degrees less than what you would expect from a British tank, but very protected turret makes playing hull down a viable choice. Mostly because hiding behind a hill doesn't require moving too much, since Conqueror Mk is a heavy tank, so as expected, very slow. The maximum speed is 34 kph, but you will be moving at a speed between 20 and 30 kph most of the time. On big maps, such slowness might be especially frustrating. In times like these, you really start to value the velocity of APDS rounds, since with them you remain pretty effective at any range if the map is open field. On the other hand, on big maps with obstacles everywhere, you will be forced to push one direction for the duration of battle, since you don't have the speed to help allies fighting on the other side of a map. Being slow also means that you won't get too far ahead of your allies, even if you want to, so following advice to stay with allies happens automatically. Reverse is 12 kph, which is okay. It will be very useful to move back after firing the cannon. There is nothing you can do in the front lines while reloading anyway. In tense situations, 2 deployments of smokescreen also helps when falling back. For example, when your shot has not done as much damage as you expected and you need to disengage in order to avoid return fire. The tank has 2 machine guns, one coaxial and one built in a little turret on a tank. Both of them are low caliber, so even despite the amount of light vehicles at Conqueror's battle rating, machine guns remain pretty useless. All I was able to achieve with them is to critically hit a plane or destroy a couple of missiles heading my way. Also, I was able to attract enemies' attention and get destroyed, but that's probably not the intended purpose of machine guns. In the arcade, all heavy tanks feel much faster, so mobility shouldn't be an issue, especially since there are no big maps in this game mode. There is also less flanking, thanks to name tags showing on the screen, which is again beneficial for a tank like Conqueror, which has all its armor concentrated in front. The only downside, but very serious one, is that your APDS round will one-shot opponents way less. That's especially noticeable on those opponents who are hiding behind cover with only their turrets exposed. Even if you manage to knock out all their crew members in a turret, if the opponent's hull is hidden behind a rock or hill, their driver will be unreachable and the tank becomes pretty much invincible for your fire as long as crew replenishment is not complete. Generally, I think Conqueror performs noticeably worse in the arcade, purely because the APDS round doesn't do enough damage to justify such a long reload. Reload speed and unreliable APDS rounds damage are probably the biggest factors affecting how you play the tank. Either you one-shot your opponent, or at least do a lot of damage, or he will have enough time to fight back or to get away. Basically everything or nothing. I would rate this tank 7 additional plates on additional plate out of 10. When it comes to tanking enemy hits, Conqueror is good. Damage is also not bad for APDS rounds, but it has quite long reload speed, which makes the tank vulnerable for reload's duration, especially when there are no allies nearby. And the tank doesn't have enough mobility, which becomes a serious downside on bigger maps, especially late game when there are not many tanks left and you have to move between capture points a lot. If I had many vehicles in my lineup to choose from, I would use Conqueror only on smaller maps.